Tonight, we are talking about it's still them, right? We're talking about stroke and personality changes that you might be feeling in your own body, or you as a care partner might be experiencing on the day to day. So, I've got lots of notes. I want to share all this goodness with you. So, let's get started. So, I tell myself it's nothing. It's just a little thing, a habit that changed. But then another one changes and another, and suddenly I can't shake the feeling that the person I knew, that the person I built a life with doesn't seem the same. He used to hold doors open for people always. Now he just walks right through. He used to tear up at sentimental movies. You know those fun dog movies where there's always that sad part. But now blank. He used to think before speaking, but now he blurts out things that sound so cold and it stings. I keep trying to convince myself it is temporary, that it's just recovery, that, so many things happen to his brain. But I'm stuck with this one terrifying thought. What if this is just who he is now? What if your loved one's personality changed overnight? They look the same, but they don't act the same. It's confusing, it's painful, and you're not alone. Today, we're breaking down why this happens and what you can do about it. Welcome to the Listen for Life Aphasia podcast. We're doing this live because it's fun. And, you get more conversational me versus scripted me. So I hope you like that. But we are here about real subjects, real concerns that so many people are expressing to me, whether it's directly inside my practice or whether it's on a Facebook post or comments I'm seeing on YouTube to my videos. I do follow a lot of these platforms because I want to understand what is the real life implication of living with aphasia, of living with these changes in the brain and personality and actions and behaviors. And I know for a fact that you guys are not getting educated about it. You don't know what's going on. Some of my care partners say that they feel like it's personal, like their stroke survivor is acting up or being mean on purpose or whatever the term is that they use. But I would argue that there are legitimate changes in the brain. There's legitimate changes to personality. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. But what happens when your loved one's personality does change after stroke? This is our third of four episodes talking specifically aimed at the right hemisphere stroke because we talked last time, left hemisphere tends to be language in a right-handed person because the side of the brain controls the opposite side of the body. So a person with a left brain stroke can have weakness on the right side, and it's the exact opposite. So if somebody has a right hemisphere stroke, there's other cognitive changes over here and it can impact the left side of the body. So it's what's called contralateral. So this is our third of four episodes about right hemisphere stroke recovery. And if you haven't listened to the other episodes, check out episode 138 on processing changes and 140 on emotions and relationships after stroke. And you can find all of those episodes on Apple, Google Podcasts, or you can check out the podcast website, listenforlifeaphasiapodcast.com, and look up those episodes. Today, we're focusing on one of the hardest changes to navigate, personality shifts. So, is it the stroke? Is it permanent? And most importantly, what can you do about it? So let's get into the weeds here. Why does right hemisphere stroke affect personality? They don't just affect movements or speech, they change how a person processes emotions, social cues, self awareness. So let's say you are stomping in the kitchen. Your survivor may very well have no idea what you're doing or what it means. They may just like it doesn't even register. So the right hemisphere controls the understanding of emotions, both their own emotions as well as others. It helps in regulating social behavior, knowing what's appropriate, s- as well as self awareness, recognizing when their behavior has changed. Your survivor may not even realize that they're acting differently. They may have no clue. They may feel like what they're putting out is exactly how they have always been and they don't see it. And can you imagine? Well, I know if you're listening to this episode, you probably can't imagine it because that's why you're tuning in. But for those of you who do not experience this personality change, it's very disconcerting. It's waking up to a stranger in your house. You don't know how to react. I've been with my husband for an awful lot of years. And if he came home tomorrow acting like a different person, I wouldn't know how to act around him. I wouldn't know how to communicate with him or ask him questions or resolve conflicts or even negotiate over what we want to eat for dinner. So when a stroke damages the right hemisphere, your person may feel like they are emotionally detached, that they're not reacting the way they used to. They might act impulsively. Think little kids before they develop that ability to control themselves, right? They are just full throttle or they say whatever's on their mind, or they just hit, right? Because that's how they feel at the moment. That's impulsive behavior. They may be less empathetic, not responding to your emotions in the same way. Again, that wife stomping around in the kitchen, it's like it could be like it's not even happening, or he could perceive that in a totally different way. And they struggle with self awareness, not realizing that their behavior has changed. The key takeaway here is that this is not a personality choice. They're not doing this on purpose. It's a brain function change. But for a spouse who's been in a relationship for a really long time with their person, it doesn't feel that way. So, why are these changes so personal? So, the spouse might be thinking, why don't they care how I feel? Like, why aren't they noticing I'm mad? Why aren't they asking what I'm mad about? Right? Or they used to be so thoughtful. Why aren't they thoughtful now? And what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to accept this forever? So the hardest part is the survivor doesn't always realize they've changed. They're not ignoring your feelings. They may struggle to recognize emotions in others. They're not trying to be mean. They may lack impulse control. They're not dismissing you. They may not understand the weight of what they said. They may just be spouting out whatever their first thought is that came to mind for them. And as a result, they didn't filter, they didn't sugarcoat, they just let you have whatever was the first thing that came in their mind. And for a spouse or a care partner, that can be lonely and exhausting and highly confusing. So let's talk about what can be done about it. And there is therapy, there is hope. But what often happens, particularly with a right hemisphere stroke, because it's not a glaring change, it may not be a glaring deficit when somebody's in the hospital, those initial days or when they're in rehab. But as more time passes and they settle in at home, more and more of these things might be showing up. And the spouse may go to the primary care physician and talk about these changes, but he doesn't necessarily know what to do with it. These are subtle changes. So let's talk about how we can cope and rebuild connection. And then we'll talk about therapy and kind of what that could look like. Again, I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush because every person is an individual and there's lots of factors before they had a stroke, right? How did they process emotion? How did they behave? And sometimes the things that you didn't like in their personality or their behavior is exacerbated from the stroke. Sometimes it flips, sometimes it flips for the better. It's it's hard to say. So these are general points that I'm sharing with you. So number 1, we want to separate the stroke from the person. And what on earth does that even mean? Instead of thinking, he just doesn't care about me anymore, he doesn't love me anymore, I could just leave. Try, his brain is processing emotions differently. I'm not saying this is the solution, but this is a bit of a mindset shift that I want you to consider. It's about stepping away and taking the emotion out of it. So, a second point, set clear boundaries. Calmly point out, I know you didn't mean that, but that came across as hurtful. So, you in my one of my last couple of episodes, I talk about the spouse that made lasagna for her husband because it's his favorite or has always been his favorite, and she made it for him. She spent a lot of time and effort making it extra special and presenting it to him, and he all he does is just dive in and eat it. He doesn't say a word, he doesn't acknowledge her, and that is hurtful. So, as a spouse, you cannot stew about that. You need to bring it to the forefront because they may not be processing what just occurred. Their emotional, their calibration is just not there. So, what can you say? I know you didn't mean that, but it came across as hurtful. And then be quiet for a second and see if you get a reaction because you want to start educating, you want to start informing, but you got to do it without emotion. And then you can try and redirect the behavior. Say, I just made you this nice lasagna dinner. I'd like you to say thank you. Can you say thank you? Right? It sounds silly, but if you've ever worked with kids, you have to train them, and it's a little bit the same way when you have a right hemisphere stroke. You have to train them. We have to bring to the forefront so that they understand that they are not processing the same way they did before. And they may not believe it, but we're going to have to try and convince them that they need to at least change their behavior, even if they don't believe it, because that's what they need to do for a relationship, for connection, to go along, to get along, these kinds of things. Number 3, we want to encourage self awareness. Gently ask them, do you think you're reacting differently than you did before? And again, you have to be quiet. You have to be quiet to give them the space to process that. But the other pro tip here, when you ask them this question, you got to be strategic about it. Not in the middle of their basketball game or when they're, eating that lasagna and watching a basketball game, not the right time, right? You have to pick your battles. But you need to start encouraging self awareness. Honey, I've noticed things are different with you. Do you feel like you're the same? Are you reacting the same? Normally, you'd be super enthusiastic about this lasagna, but I'm getting nothing. What do you think about that? The other thing is the spouse could do is to keep a journal of interactions and start looking for patterns. Because again, that's evidence, isn't it? I talked on a previous episode about recording. a video recording of someone who has no idea, and then they see the recording, it can help. Again, it's a delicate balance, and it's not appropriate in every situation. So you have to use your best judgment and discretion. Use mirror and video to help them see their own expressions and reactions. Maybe they're, excuse me, maybe they're going to be stunned that they had no reaction on their face. I had this one gentleman, gosh, way back in my career, and I got right up in his face, and I don't know what it was, because I think it's because, well, number 1, I was a naive clinician. But number 2 is I wasn't getting anything back from him. So in a way, I was escalating, and I was getting closer and closer to his face. And you know what? Oh my gosh, it's actually really embarrassing. He goes, and he literally, he was in a wheelchair, and I was kneeling down, and I was, not very far from him, and he lunged at me to get me to back off. So obviously he was starting to perceive that I was getting up in his grill, and that he needed me to back off, but he didn't know what to say, so he reacted. And I tell you what, that still just sharing that story still stuns me today. Realizing how I was just all caught up in my own brain, in how I was trying to get through to him, that I wasn't picking up on the subtle cues from him. I'll tell you what, after that episode, I learned. So before we keep going on, I'd like to address some of the things that have come up in the chat. Okay, so let's put this up here. Leanne is asking, is it possible for my mom to relearn emotional awareness? Can she recognize emotions again with the right support? Absolutely, Leanne. It's challenging. Part of it is we have to have good examples of emotion, right? I've used in treatment pictures of faces where, they're just showing just not exaggerated, kind of faces. It's more subtle, and we look at it and we start breaking it down. What are the eyes doing? What's the mouth doing? What does it mean when the corners of the lips pull up, or when the eyes lift up, or when you get that little, crease in the middle of your forehead? What do those things mean? And so you can retrain it by breaking it down into bits and pieces, but it is a long process. They have to kind of suspend belief in a way, because their mind is just not processing at that level. So they literally need to memorize it, and we have to be excessively patient with it. But it can be done. So you want to find a clinician, a speech pathologist in particular, that understands right hemisphere changes, someone who can specialize in this and walk you through it. Now, something like this is not going to be a covered service under an insurance plan like Medicare, because it's not what they would consider medically necessary. And I know that's a weird thing to say, but I want to bring this to you, that there is a way to do it. You could work with a speech pathologist, or at least, work with a speech pathologist for an hour and learn what you need to do, and then you execute and train that at home. It is absolutely possible to do. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a jumping off point, Leanne. If you have more questions, please reach out to me. Hello at dolifespeechpathology.com. You also can, schedule a consultation. Happy to talk to you about this and help you map out those next steps forward. So I love this. Look for patterns. Try recording them to let them know how they sound. Absolutely. And you could start the conversation by saying, honey, I love you, but things have changed, and I want you to see how they've changed. I'd like to record you, and then can we have a conversation? The best way to get this to land with them and to get their buy-in and agreement is to be objective. You can't be emotional about it. If you start getting emotional with it, they're probably going to shut down. All right. There you go. Aphasia Phil. Thank you, sir. Right hemisphere, left hemisphere, either way, people are scared and lonely sometimes. I'd argue, Phil, more than sometimes. And it's one of these things about isolation. Sometimes it's a self imposed isolation. People are embarrassed. They don't want to go out in public with a limp. They don't want to go out in public if their speech isn't perfect. Whatever the case may be, and I get it. I absolutely 100% get it. But there's ways to take little steps to building your confidence so you can get out because that lonely is horrendous. It but there's online groups. There's ways to connect with people. And if you don't know where to start, you need to reach out to me. You need to reach out to Aphasia Phil. Aphasia Phil is doing the work. He is an aphasia ambassador and he has aphasia himself. And Phil, keep up the good work, sir. Thank you for being here. All right, let's take a look at this one. Michelle is asking, what's the best way to point out when my husband says something inappropriate without embarrassing him? Number one, best to do that in private, not in public. And if you have a way of documenting it, and I say it this way because I'm if my emotions are running, I don't remember the words, I remember the feelings. So if, let's say, husband and I are having an argument, mm, he argues, I listened, right? Because I can't, if my emotions are going at all, I don't have the words. I can't justify. I can't, not necessarily to the point of defending, but or giving a counterpoint. He is verbal. He can remember exactly what I said and how I said it, and I won't remember that. So it's like not a fair it's not a fair argument. So for me, it's a lot easier to just listen and then we come back to it when the emotion is not involved. So it's very important to make sure to as best you can. Again, maybe not in the moment, but you got to step back. You got to be a little more objective. If you can write down the words, if you can write down the scenario, document it in some way, because when you document it, that means it likely happened. You're not going to go out of your way to make something up and write it down, right? So that can give you a little bit of ammunition. You're not going to sort it in one conversation. It's going to be an ongoing process. And this is where you have to kind of get an agreement with your survivor saying, can we, if I notice this happens, can I hit voice memo on my phone so that I can record it so that we can talk it through and work it out? You know your survivor best. You just have to take that as it comes based on what you know about your person. But these are strategies. It's all about being able to reflect back. So in aphasia treatment, we do something called reflection. You act like a mirror. If the person with aphasia says something to me and I don't quite understand it, or I need them to finish, it's what we call the feedback loop. They need to hear me say it back exactly how they said it to finish that feedback loop so then they can think, is that what I meant? Or, and they can confirm, or then they can clarify their message. So if your husband says nothing about lasagna, or maybe he says something not very nice, you say back to him, honey, you said this was too saucy and too cheesy. And then wait. This is one of my strategies. You've got to pause. You have to allow that person, that survivor, that those couple of extra seconds to process. And you just need to be quiet so that they can do it. reflect it back like a mirror, and then see what they say, and then take it the next step after that. Okay, let's see. Oh, thank you for writing this. Document scenarios and then speak to them in private. Absolutely. Okay, I think we are all caught up in the questions and comments. Thank you for submitting those, everybody. Let's wrap up this episode. So, what do we know? The right hemisphere strokes don't just affect speech and movement, they can change emotions, personality, and self awareness. Care partners often feel hurt, frustrated, or even lost, but these changes are not intentional. Often they are not intentional. Although, if there's I'll give a caveat. If there's a long history of this behavior prior to the stroke, maybe it is intentional or it's a learned behavior. And you may not be able to change that with a stroke. That is a little out of my scope of personality and psychology and those kinds of things, but you have to interpret what your stroke survivor is doing through the lens of who they were before their stroke. Sometimes those behaviors and personality traits get exacerbated, blown out of proportion, and maybe it's not the good ones that are blown out of proportion. So it's a bit of a slippery slope and it is complicated. So this is where you need to work with a professional. You need to work with a speech pathologist who has experience, particularly in chronic stroke, chronic aphasia, something over a year into it, because it's that phase after a year when I think of it as the dust is settling, right? Rehab is over. You're figuring out how to get back into your daily life, your daily routines. What does the next days, months, years look like? That's when those chickens come home to roost, so to speak. That's when you start to really see what's going on. And sometimes you need the help of a professional to walk through that. Okay, last thing, and then we'll wrap it up. Small adjustments in communication and support can help rebuild connection. Part of it is with care partners, they need to learn what's normal, what's stroke, what can it do, what are the normal brain functions. What before got into neurology and speech pathology, I had no clue what the brain did, right? We just take it all for granted, like being able to drive a car, being able to walk out the door, right? These are just automatic things. But when you have a stroke, it becomes very much to the forefront. Oh my, what's different now? What are these changes? How are we going to cope and adapt and move forward with them? So that's where you really need to work with someone who can help you navigate that understanding, because understanding is one of the first steps, figuring out how to communicate with your survivor and then working on strategies and then working on making things better. But it's not a blanket approach. It's a step by step approach based on what's the most important thing to work on first. So with that being said, you, the spouse, care partner, I have a special place in my heart for you based on hundreds of conversations, being in people's homes, doing home health for so much of my career, doing telepractice, which also puts me in their homes. For more than the last 10 years, I've been in telepractice. We have a live hands-on course made just for you, the care partner. If you are interested, please check out the show notes and check out the links below to learn more. We have 2 courses coming up in the month of April. Please check out those dates. Any questions, please reach out. We are here for you. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate your time. Have a wonderful day. And we will see you on the Listen for Life Aphasia podcast next time.